Day Ramayana have been published in paperback by Subbu Publications. His series on Mahabharata for beginners and Ramayana for beginners is published online by Sutradhar. He also contributes articles and book reviews on various forums. Deepakshi has been participating in literary festivals like PULF 2022 and Western Ghats Literature Festival. He stays in Bangalore with his parents, wife, and daughter. At present, he is working on a book that presents the universal lessons from the Mahabharata. Uh, you can visit his website deepakmr.com for more information. So today he is going to talk about the story of Vyasa's Mahabharata. We think we all know the story of Mahabharata, but our knowledge is often dependent on what we have seen on TV or in pop culture. Uh, but he today he's going to talk about the real story of Mahabharata. And having said that, I think I'll give the floor to Mr. Deepakji, who will talk more about his book.
So, namaste everybody. So, first of all, thanks to Indic Forum for inviting me. So, it's great to be here among all of you and to talk about my book and to talk about the Mahabharata. So, like I said, we all know the story of the Mahabharata. So, we have been brought up on the Mahabharata. We have heard tales from our parents, from our grandparents. We have watched TV shows. We have read books. So, then what is this book about? What is this discussion about? So, let me start off by presenting about this book. So this book is titled Original Vyasa Mahabharata. It is a concise summary of all the 18 parvas of the Mahabharata. So now before we actually go into the book, very briefly, what is the Mahabharata? So as we all know, Mahabharata is known as the book of Dharma. So it is the story of the eternal struggle between the forces of good and evil. So it is a story wherein the Lord came to earth to save the earth from evil and to protect the good. So this is known as the greatest epic in the world. And Krishna Dvaipayana, who is also known as Veda Vyasa of this era, he is the author. So the Mahabharata contains around 1 lakh verses, so which tells you the story of the Bharata clan, which is why Mahabharata is the title. And we all believe that Ganesha was the scribe who wrote the Mahabharata. So Vyasa narrated the story and Ganesha wrote it down. So this is in a nutshell about the Mahabharata. So now why are we talking about the Mahabharata now? So what is the relevance? Is there a relevance? Yes, definitely there is a relevance. Because the first part, which you can see on the screen, this is something which is said very often, that anything that is to be found in the world is there in the Mahabharata. And anything you don't find in the Mahabharata, you will not find anywhere else. So that is something which is very interesting about the Mahabharata. So basically what it shows is that the Mahabharata is a vast ocean. It's a repository of knowledge, of information, of stories, of our culture, our heritage, our legends. And it has very useful lessons that are relevant even today, even in today's world. It is not that this is mythology, something that has happened in the past. It's, a grandmother's tale to be listened to and just enjoy. No, sorry. It's a story that is relevant even today because even today we have wars in the world. So as you know, everywhere there are wars going on in different places. There are conflicts. There is a eternal conflict between good and bad. So whatever happened during the Mahabharata period is relevant today. And the Mahabharata has some very interesting lessons that all of us can imbibe, all of us can learn and follow in our lives. So that's the reason for the relevance of Mahabharata even today. That's why even today, we talk about the Mahabharata. So the story and the lessons, it basically shows us a path forward to the path of Dharma. So the life which we live, we want to live a satisfying life. We want to do something. And we want to live the life to our spiritual fullest. So for that, we have to follow the path of Dharma. So what is Dharma? What is the path of Dharma? All that we find out from the Mahabharata. So that's why it's relevant even today to talk about Mahabharata. Next, coming to the story of the Mahabharata. What is the story of the Mahabharata? So I'm sure you would have heard this story. So in brief, here is an overview. So Mahabharata, it's basically there are two families, two clans. There are a feud between those clans. They clash, they fight with each other. There is Yudhishthira, who is a gambling addict. He gambles, he loses everything. Then we have Karna, who is a Dhanavira, a great man who gave up everything and who was discriminated all his life. His teacher Drona didn't teach him. Draupadi rejected him, refused to marry him. And it is because of Draupadi that the war took place. And the Mahabharata is the story of Krishna, who helped the Pandavas win the war. Without him, they would not have won. And he used deceit and trickery to win the war. It's a story where at the end of everything, the Pandavas lose everything. They don't gain everything. So I'm sure this is what many of you would have heard, you would have seen, you would have read about, right? What if I told you that all this is false? None of this is true. None of what you saw on the screen is true, but this is what we have learned. This is what we have heard as the story of the Mahabharata. That's because the Mahabharata story has been distorted over the times. That's why we have seen on TV, we have read various fiction novels with certain stories, but that story is not necessarily the original story of the Mahabharata. So that's the reason why we are having this particular session, this particular discussion. So what then is the real story? So like I said, many people do not know the real story because we have depended on TV shows, on B.R. Chopra Mahabharata, on Star Plus Mahabharata. So they have made distortions to suit their TV show, to suit their script. So, what is the original story? So, like I said, the original Mahabharata was the one narrated by Vyasa to Ganesha. Now, that script is not available today. We don't have it. So, then what happened to the Mahabharata later on? It has been passed on through word of mouth. So, these word of mouth, the Mahabharata, it is available as an original unabridged edition, wherein there is the Sanskrit verses along with translation done by experts over the years. So this is the original Mahabharata that contains the real story. The other stories are fictional stories narrated by authors who want to, present a particular point of view or who want to embellish the story so that their book sells, so that their TV show sells. So that's why we see a lot of confusion between what is there in the original Mahabharata and what we see on TV or read in books. So the real story is to be found in the unabridged edition. So what is this unabridged edition? So there are different editions that have been brought out by various scholars. One of the earliest translation was one done by Kesari Mohan Ganguly. So it is popularly referred to as KMG. Now this is the translation which is available in public domain. So which means it is available for free. Anyone can go to the internet, search for KMG Mahabharata. So you will get the Mahabharata with translation by Kesari Mohan Ganguly, and you can read it to know the original story. Now the only problem is this translation of this unabridged edition. It covers 5,000 plus pages. So as you know, today people are just not reading. So especially youngsters, they're the Instagram reel generation. So to expect them to read 5,000 pages is a bit too much. So there is a need to bring it out in different versions to cater to their need. So in this way, there are different versions. So you have a Gita Press, which is very popular in Hindi and regional languages. Then you have Southern edition, Kumbakonam, Northern, M.N. Datta. So many editions are there. So what has happened over the years, bards sang the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was sung as a poem. And when it kept moving from mouth to mouth, some additions happened, some changes happened, some deletions happened. So that has given rise to different editions or different versions of the Mahabharata. So what an organization called as BORI did, which you will see in the second part, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institution. So they came out with a very vast project headed by a team headed by Dr. V.S. Suptankar. So they thought that let us try and bring out a proper original edition of the Mahabharata after referring to all the manuscripts. So the team spent nearly more than 50 years of work. They studied every single manuscript that was available. And based on that, they brought out what is called a CE. or critical edition. So this is considered as the gold standard as far as Mahabharata is concerned. It is not that this is the same Mahabharata which is written by Vyasa, but it is a work wherein many scholars have collaborated. They have studied various manuscripts and they have tried to collate and bring out one version which is universally accepted. Now, this is, of course, the Sanskrit verses. So, Dr. Bibek Debroy, who unfortunately passed away recently, so he has brought out the English translation of Bori Critical Edition. So, the first two, this KMG and Bori, are the more popular versions of the Mahabharata. So, now why this book? Why did I write this book? Because there is a need for an authentic summary, not the entire story, but a summary. Because, like I said, we need to ensure that our future generations remain in touch with our heritage and with our Puranas. So, they also need to know about the Mahabharata and its story. Otherwise, what will happen? They will depend on TV shows, they will depend on books, novels, and things like that. And the message gets distorted. So there is a need for a book that gives a summary of the original Mahabharata. So the original Mahabharata is divided into parvas. There are 18 parvas. So such a summary will allow people to understand what is the truth and what is myth. So there are many myths prevalent about the Mahabharata, some of which I had put up in a slide before. So like I was saying, for example, it blamed Draupadi for the entire war, or it said that Karna was discriminated toward throughout his life. So these are myths prevalent about the Mahabharata. We need to try and ensure that people know the real story, and it should be in a simple and easy to digest form. Because the unabridged editions which I spoke about just now, they are written many years back. So the style is a Victorian style of English mostly, and today's generation may not connect with it. And like I said, 5,000 pages, people do not have the patience to read. So I thought, let's have a book which gives a summation of the entire Mahabharata and which can serve as a reference for anyone who wants to know the story of the Mahabharata. It does not give the entire story in detail, but it gives a summary. Basically, you can find out what is there in the Mahabharata, what is the story of the Mahabharata, and what happens in each of the parvas. So, with this particular reason, I came out with this book. So, initially, I published it in Kindle. Later on, Subbu Publications have brought out this book in paperback. It's called as the original Vyasa Mahabharata. So the book is divided into 18 chapters, just like the 18 parvas of the Mahabharata. So as we know, the Ramayana is divided into kandas. Like you have Balakanda, Yuddhakanda, Sundarkanda, and so on. So the Mahabharata is divided into different parvas. There are 18 parvas. So each of the parvas have been presented in this book in the form of one chapter. And there is a summary of the entire story as per the unabridged text. So I have tried my best to take care to ensure that there are no changes. I have stuck to the original versions as per the KMG and critical edition, and I have ensured that all key events are covered. So of course, it is humanly impossible to cover 5,000 pages in 150 pages, but the gist, the summary with all the key events have been covered. So the style of writing is simple and to the point to ensure that a person of any age, person with any kind of reading background can just pick up and quickly read through this book and know what is there in the Mahabharata. So this is about the book. So now, since we are talking about 18 parvas, so this is a bit interesting. So the number 18 has a lot of significance. So as we know, Vyasa is the author of the Mahabharata. So the Vyasa of this era is Krishna Dvaipayana, who was the son of Parashara and Satyavati. So apart from the Mahabharata, he has also written 18 Puranas. Now in the Mahabharata, there are Parvas, a total of 18. So we all know that many people consider Mahabharata as a book of war, which is actually not correct, because the war is not the only thing that happens in the book, but it's of course the a very significant event. So the war took place for 18 days. So here again we have 18. Then we know that the Mahabharata is associated with the Bhagavad Gita. So there are 18 chapters there. And in the war, there were 18 Akshauhinis of soldiers who participated. 11 on the side of the Kauravas and 7 on the side of the Pandavas. So an Akshauhini is a battalion. Now, what does this Akshauhini have? It has 21,870 chariots, 21,870 elephants, 65,610 horses, and 1,09,350 soldiers. So total of 21,870. Now, if you look at these numbers, they are very interesting. Take 21,870, 2 plus 1, 3 plus 8, 11 plus 7, 18. Take the number of horses, 6 plus 5, 11 plus 6, 17 plus 1, 18. Again, take the soldiers, 1 plus 9, 10, 13 plus 5, 18. Total number of soldiers, 2 plus 1, 3 plus 8, 11 plus 7, 18. So you can see 11 is something like a magic number. So 18 is a very significant number in the Mahabharata. So there are 18 parvas. Of course, in the critical edition, there are actually 100 chapters there. But in general, they are all uh, categorized under 18 main parvas. So 18 is a significant number of dharma. It is the number that represents dharma. And the Mahabharata has 18 parvas. So my book has 18 chapters. So very quickly, I'll just brush through it, because if I have to talk about each chapter, each of the chapter in the story it contains, each parva itself will take 1 hour. So it is practically impossible. So I'll just give a brief overview. So the first parva is called as the Adi Parva. So as the word meaning itself says, Adi means beginning. It is the beginning of the story of the ancestors of the Bharata dynasty. Now, a very interesting point here is that there are multiple narratives happening within the Mahabharata. So, how it starts is there is a Sarpa Satra, a Sarpa Yajna, which you can see in the background. So, Takshaka, the snake, kills the emperor Parikshit. So, his son Janmejaya is very angry, and he decides that I'm going to kill all the snakes. So, he carries out a yajna called as the Sarpa Satra. All the snakes are pulled into the yajna. Later on, of course, the yajna is stopped, because the yajna would lead to a genocide of the Naga population. So during this, what happens? Vaishapayana is there. He's the disciple of Vyasa. And when the Sarpasatra is over, he begins to narrate the story of the Mahabharata. Now, this is one narration. Another narration is there is a sage called as Sauti, Ugrashrava. So he is narrating to other sages in the Naimisharanya, Naimisha forest. So there are two narratives happening. First, Sauti starts with the narration, then he tells about Vaishampayana's narration, and that's how the story progresses. So this is very interesting. When we go to the Bhagavad Gita, so we have Krishna narrating to Arjuna. Krishna is talking, he's talking about the philosophy of life, about karma and dharma to Arjuna. That is being narrated by Sanjaya to Dhritarashtra, which in turn is being narrated by Vaishampayana to the Emperor Janmejaya. And this in turn is being narrated by Sauti to the sages in the Naimisharanya. So you can see there are nested multiple narratives that are happening in the Mahabharata. So in the Adi Parva, it starts by talking about how the world was created, sages, gods, demons, and so on. And the focus is on the Chandra Vamsha. Now the Ramayana has the focus of the Surya Vamsha. So Rama belonged to the Surya Vamsha, whereas here it is the Chandra Vamsha which is predominant. So Chandra Vamsha starts with Chandra, Chandra's son Buddha. So Buddha had a son called Pururavas, who is considered as the founder of the Chandra Vamsha. So all the kings who came later belonged to his dynasty, and it is the Chandra Vamsha which ruled India. So then we had various kings who came after that. Like you had Ayus, Nahusha, Yayati, Puru, Dushyanta. Then you had Bharata. So Bharata was a famous emperor, as we know. So it is after him that Bharata Varsha is named, and the Mahabharata is also named after Bharata. Then we had a king called Hasti, who built the capital city, Hastinapura. And then we had Kuru. So he was another important king. Basically, what happened is the Bharata clan had lost its capital. So Kuru was the one who brought it back. So that's why he became famous. So later on, the dynasty was known as Kuru Vamsha. So it's all the same: Kuru Vamsha, Chandra Vamsha, Bharata Vamsha, and so on. And now this is not the complete lineage, this is just an example. Then we had a king called Pratipa, and his son was Shantanu. Now, from Shantanu, the story of the Mahabharata begins. So, Shantanu was married to Ganga, and they had a son called Devavrata. Of course, there's a very long story which many of you will be knowing about. So, we will not go into that. So, Ganga leaves Shantanu and goes away, and then he falls in love with Satyavati, who is a fisherwoman. So, then Bhishma or Devavrata wants his father to get married, but Satyavati's father puts a condition that my daughter's son should be the next king. So Bhishma then takes a vow or pratigna. So Bhishma means terrible. So he takes a terrible pratigna, which is why he is known as Bhishma. So this pratigna or vow changes the course of events. It changes the very story of the Mahabharata. So later on, Satyavati marries Shantanu. Then unfortunately, her sons die. And she tells Bhishma that, okay, my sons are dead, so you take over the throne. He says, no, I have taken an oath, I will not do it. So then they carry out a practice called Niyoga, wherein Vyasa ensures that Satyavati's sons' widows are uh, given birth. Pandu and Dhritarashtra is born. And then Dhritarashtra is blind, so Pandu becomes the king. So due to an unfortunate series of events, Pandu retires to the forest and Dhritarashtra rules. Then later on, Pandu dies. The Pandavas and Kauravas are born, and the beginning of the rivalry starts. It starts when the Pandavas come to Hastinapura. Now, the Pandavas were growing up in the forest, so that is when everything was fine. But the moment they come to the capital city of Hastinapura, the eldest son Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra's eldest son, becomes jealous. He feels that this is my kingdom, so they are going to snatch my kingdom. So a rivalry starts. So in between, they get trained. So they are trained under Kripa. Later on, they are trained under the great warrior sage Drona, who learned the art of warfare from Parshurama. So then they try to murder the Pandavas. They try to poison Bhishma. They try to burn them alive. So they go to the forests. They escape there for their lives. Then Draupadi Swayamvara happens. Then finally, Dhritarashtra gives them a kingdom, a barren kingdom, but they make it into a great kingdom called Indraprastha. And then there are an unfortunate series of events because of which Arjuna has to go on exile. And finally, there is a Kandava Dahana. The Kandava forest has to be burnt, set afire. So that has to happen because Agni had a curse. That curse had to be redeemed. Now, in order to redeem that curse, he had to burn the forest, but Indra was not allowing. So he takes Krishna and Arjuna's help. So both Arjuna says that we have to do this, right? You have given us a task to do. So we need resources for that task. We need weapons, we need chariot. So that's when all the key resources come in. So Agni summons Varuna, who gives Arjuna the great bow called as the Gandiva. And he also gives Krishna, Vishnu's chakra, Sudarshana, and he gives a mace called as Kaumodaki. And Arjuna also gets a great chariot, which is known as Kapidvaja. There is a great ape on the flag. So the Kandava Dahana takes place, and with that, the first Parva, the first chapter, Adi Parva, ends. Now, after this, what happens? The architect of the Rakshasas, called as Maya, he is saved in the Kandava Dahana. Arjuna saves him. So he repays the favor by building a palace with a hall of illusions. So that is the first Sabha that is being spoken of. So in the Sabha Parva, which is the second chapter, there are two Sabhas. One is the Sabha, which refers to the hall of illusions. So this is the great hall. The second Sabha is the infamous Dyuta Sabha. Now, why does this Dyuta or the game of dice happen? Is it because Yudhishthira was a gambler? No. So this is false. So there is a popular perception that Yudhishthira was a gambling addict. So this is completely false. He was not a gambling addict. In fact, poor fellow didn't even know how to play dice. So why did he do that? Very quickly. So it was decided that Yudhishthira should become the emperor of the world. So he carries out the Rajasuya Yagna. So Krishna says you cannot do it until Jarasandha is killed. So Bhima kills Jarasandha. Sorry. There's a Digvijaya campaign wherein the four brothers go to the four corners of the world. They defeat all the kings. the Rajasuya Yajna takes place. So you would have heard of the story of how Shishupala insults Krishna and is killed. Then what happens? Duryodhana goes to the hall of illusions wherein he makes a fool of himself and he's humiliated. So he's itching for revenge. He's so frustrated that he decides to commit suicide. So that's when Shakuni, to save him, says that let us cheat the Pandavas of their kingdom, and they summon them for a game of dice. Now Yudhishthira gets a summon from his uncle. So he feels that it is my Kshatriya Dharma to obey my uncle's order to play the game because it is a challenge. So a Kshatriya should not refuse a challenge. So Yudhishthira plays the game of the dice. He gets carried away in the game, and we all know what happens. They lose everything, and Draupadi is humiliated. She is brought to the hall, and there is an attempt to strip her. Karna orders that she should be stripped in public, but then she is saved miraculously. Dharma saves her. So the dharma could refer to Krishna, it could refer to Draupadi's dharma which she followed, but ultimately she is saved. And Bhima is so wild with anger that he takes a vow that I'm going to kill all of Dhritarashtra's son. So scared, Dhritarashtra reverses the result. He says, you are free to go. But then his evil son once again harasses his father and says that if we allow them to go, they'll come back and kill us. So let us call them again for a game of dice. And the stupid old man, he calls them back again. And Yudhishthira, once again, he makes a fool of himself. So, as we know, we would have heard about in our day to day life that it's okay to commit mistakes. We all commit mistakes. But we should not commit the same mistake repeatedly, again and again. Now, unfortunately, Yudhishthira does that. He commits the second mistake again. He once again comes back to the game of dice. He knows what is going to happen. He knows he's going to lose. He knows they are going to be sent to exile. But yet he says that I'm bound by my Kshatriya Dharma. So he comes, plays the game of dice, they lose, and they have to go to the forest. So that is the Sabha Parva. The third Parva is called as the Vana Parva, Aranyaka Parva, wherein the Pandavas go to the forest. They have to stay there in exile. And that's where they get the Akshaya Patra from Surya so that they can have food. Now, this is very interesting. There's a contrast between the exile of Rama and the exile of the Pandavas. Now, Rama went alone. He only had his brother and wife with him. So he lived a life of solitude there. Everything they had to do on their own. Whereas Yudhishthira came with a large entourage because he kept continuing to do rituals during his exile. So he had his chief priest Daumya who was there with him. There were many Brahmanas and also there were many villagers who loved the prince Yudhishthira. So they came with him. So they all were there and they all had to be fed. So Yudhishthira, he always thought about others. So he was like, how am I going to feed them? They are all my responsibility. So he prays to Surya and Surya gives him a vessel, which is now referred to as the Akshaya Patra. Incidentally, in the Mahabharata, the word Akshaya Patra is not there. It's a vessel that gives unlimited food until the last meal is cooked and Draupadi has his food. Now, at the same time, what happens? Duryodhana gets a curse from the sage Maitreya. He insults the sage. When the sage is talking to him, he disregards him. He slaps his thigh out of frustration. So the sage gets so angry, he says that Bhima is going to break your thigh in the battle and you're going to die. So the stage is set for the war. Then Arjuna has prepared for the war, so he goes to get divine weapons or Divyastras. So wherein he meets a Kirata who is none other than Shiva. So this is another story which most of us are familiar with. So he goes and battles with the Kirata, is humiliated. Then he realizes the Kirata is none other than Shiva. So Shiva is pleased with Arjuna's valor. He gives him all the divine weapons. So then Indra, who is Arjuna's divine father, he takes him to Indraloka. He stays there. There are many adventures and so on. So meanwhile, the Pandavas are in the forest. So they listen to the story of Nala Damayanti. The sage Brihadashva tells them. Now this is very interesting because Nala had a similar status as Yudhishthira. He also lost a game of dice, but he does not wager his wife. His brother tells him, you wager your wife and you can win back your kingdom. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he gets up and walks away. So this is an interesting comparison. Also, the sage teaches Yudhishthira how to play dice. So this is important, why we'll see a bit later. So then Bhima meets Hanuman. This is another thing which we have seen and heard about, a very famous story. Then Arjuna returns. In the meanwhile, the Pandavas go on a Tirtha Yatra. Then they meet their ancestor, Nahush, who has been cursed to be a snake. So this is another famous story which many of us are familiar with. Then there is what is called as the Gosha Yatra, wherein the Kauravas try to come there to humiliate the Pandavas, but they get humiliated in return. So what happens? They fight with the uh, Gandharvas and they're defeated. Yudhishthira, Duryodhana is taken captive. Then Arjuna and Bhima go and fight and save Duryodhana. So once again he is humiliated. Then Jayadratha abducts Draupadi. So he's punished by cutting off his hair. So he's so humiliated that he goes and gets a boon from Lord Shiva that he uses later to kill Abhimanyu. So we'll see that later. Then there are so many stories which happen in the Vanaparva. Vanaparva is a very important part of the Mahabharata because there are so many sub stories which are narrated. So, like I said, if we start talking about all this, that itself we will need more than 1 hour. So, the Ramayana is there here. Sage Markandeya tells the story of Rama. Markandeya Ramayana, about which I have written a book. And he also tells the story of Satyavan Savitri. Reason why he says is he says that just as pure as Savitri was, same way Draupadi is also pure. Just as Savitri saved Satyavan, so will Draupadi save him. Then we shift to Karna. So we all know that Karna is one of the most famous characters in the Mahabharata. So there are many myths about Karna that he was he had to suffer discrimination and things like that. Now most of these are stories which were added later on. It was added during the 20th century by later on authors. But anyway, Karna was Kunti's son, born before marriage. He had a kavacha and kundala, armor and earrings given to him by his father Surya. So Indra comes and takes it away. But in exchange, Karna demands a weapon and he gets the Shakti. Then finally in the Vanaparva, you have what is called as the Yaksha Prashna, wherein there is a conversation with a crane who is none other than Dharma, Yudhishthira's father. And finally, Dharma says that now you're in exile, you have to complete your exile. 1 year of exile had to be completed incognito, meaning they had to go somewhere and hide and they should not be detected. If they are detected, again they have to go back to 13 years exile. So Yama or Dharma says that go to Virata's kingdom, stay there. I will give you a boon that you cannot be detected. So with that, the third parva or Vana parva comes to an end. Then we have the Virata parva. So in the Virata parva, they spend 1 year incognito in King Virata's Matsya kingdom. So they take different identities as you can see in the background. So Yudhishthira becomes Kanakabhatta. He becomes the king's advisor. And as the king's advisor, he has to play dice. So this is where what I mentioned in the previous chapter becomes relevant. Because he learns dice. Yudhishthira is taught dice by the great sage Brihadashva, and he uses that knowledge here to learn. Then Virata is happy with, then Bhima is works as a cook called as Ballabha. Arjuna is the dance teacher and so on. Now everything is going on fine in the exile, but then Kichaka arrives, who is the king's brother-in-law, and he lusts for Draupadi, and we all know that story. So Bhima kills Kichaka to save Draupadi. And when Kichaka is dead, the Kauravas are happy because they have not been able to capture Virata because they know that Kichaka is a very powerful warrior. Now that he's dead, they decide to attack Virata's kingdom. So there is a Virata war that happens. Arjuna single-handedly defeats the entire Kaurava army. Everyone from Bhishma, Drona, Karna, Duryodhana, everybody are there and everyone are defeated. So Arjuna does that single-handedly, and then later on the Pandavas reveal their identity. So of course, like I said, all these are stories are so much in detail that we can spend hours together talking about that, but we have a restriction of time. So the Pandavas reveal their identity. King Virata is happy. He says that my daughter, I want Arjuna to marry. Arjuna says, I cannot marry because I am her teacher, so let my son Abhimanyu marry. So with that, the Virata Parva gets over. Then the next Parva is called as Udyoga. Now, Udyoga means work. So what is the Udyoga happening here? Two things. One is preparation for war, and the other thing is parallelly attempts for peace. So both are happening. So there are peace envoys going to and forth to try and stop the war. But unfortunately, what happens? Duryodhana is totally bullheaded. He has become so arrogant that he is not ready to listen to anyone. So everyone come to advise him. From the great Parshurama, Narada, Kanva, his own mother, he does not listen to anyone. He has decided that he wants war. And sorry, he's doing this because he's confident that his friend Karna is with him. Now, Duryodhana has a lot of confidence in Karna. He thinks that Karna is a great archer, which is true. Karna was a great archer. And he has a feeling that Karna will kill Arjuna, I will kill Bhima, and thus we are going to defeat the Pandavas and win the war. So they have that confidence, so they are not ready to go for peace. They want war. So preparations happen for war. All the kingdoms in the country take sides. So there are 11 Akshauhinis or battalions with the Kauravas and 7 with the Pandavas. So Shalya is the uncle to the Pandavas, but he's strict. Duryodhana takes care of his hospitality, and Shalya accepts his hospitality unknowingly, thinking he's accepting the hospitality of the Pandavas, and he's obliged. He has no option but to go with the Kauravas. So finally, the two sides are ready for war. In the meanwhile, Krishna makes a last attempt for peace, but Duryodhana is so arrogant that he tries to capture Krishna, and Krishna reveals his Divya Avtara, and everyone is shocked to see it. Then Krishna goes and meets Karna and gives him a last minute offer. He says that you are on the wrong path. Come to the other side because the Pandavas are your brother. They are not your enemies. But Karna says, no, I've already made my decision. I'm going to stick with my friend. I know that I'm going to lose the war. I know that I'm going to die, but still I'm going to be here. Then Kunti also makes an attempt, but she also fails. But she gets a word from Karna that at the end of the war, you will still have 5 sons. Either I will be dead or Arjuna will be dead. So then the war begins. So Bhishma takes over as the commander of the Kaurava side, and the Pandavas choose Drishtadyumna, who is Draupadi's brother. And what happens? Bhishma insults Karna. He calls him Ardharatha. He's classifying all the warriors. So Ratha is one who is entitled to chariot, who is equivalent to one chariot, wherein a chariot protectors and so on. No, he says you are only fit to be classified as Ardharatha or half a warrior. So Karna is so outraged that he says, until Bhishma is commander, I'm not going to fight. So they even agree to a code of conduct, and finally the war starts. So the first war parva is the Bhishma parva. So Sanjaya gets a Divya Drushti and he's able to see what is happening. Now, there is a common perception that Sanjaya was doing live commentary of the war. This is not correct. So actually, he was also participating in the war. He was a soldier. He would go participate in the war and then come back to Dhritarashtra, tell the story, and in this way, he would continue. So as we all know, Arjuna refuses to fight. He says, I cannot kill my own loved people. And Krishna advises him, the famous Gitopadesha happens, and then the war starts. So, like I said, the war story is vast. So we can talk about it for hours together, but we have just another 10-15 minutes. So the war progresses. The first 10 days of the war, not much happens. The only incident is that Uttara, who is Abhimanyu's brother-in-law, is killed. On the first day, the Bhishma prevails, but later on, it's the Pandavas who prevail. Arjuna and Bhima create havoc among the Kauravas, and they are able to help their side get control. But they are not able to bring down Bhishma. So finally, Krishna is angry. He tries to attack Bhishma. He does that because he wants to provoke Arjuna. So Arjuna says that, okay, I agree with you. I'm going to tell you how to, I'm going to kill Bhishma. And then he takes the Pandavas to Bhishma, who says that you put Shikandi in front of me and attack, and then you can kill me. So there is a final war, and finally Bhishma is brought down. So here again there is a myth that you know Arjuna hid behind Bhishma and killed. Arjuna hid behind Shikandi and killed Bhishma. This is not correct. Shikandi is there in front, but Arjuna and Bhishma have a fierce war, and finally he dies. So Bhishma falls, and Bhishma Parva is over, and then Drona takes over. Now, what Drona does is he says that instead of fighting this war, which we cannot win, let us capture Yudhishthira, let us make him play dice once again. Now, Drona doesn't know that this time Yudhishthira has learned how to play dice. But what happens? Arjuna finds out this, and when Drona tries to capture Yudhishthira, Arjuna saves him at the last minute. So then they make a plan. So there are a group of people called as Samashapatakas. So Shusharma is the Trigarta king. He and his soldiers, they hate Arjuna so much that they form a suicide squad to kill him. So they divert Arjuna's attention and try to ensure that Yudhishthira is captured, but Arjuna uh, comes back and the war continues. Then what happens? This time Susharma and his men take Arjuna away from the battlefield. And then Drona forms the Chakravyuha. So the Chakravyuha formation, no one knows how to break in. Only Abhimanyu knows how to break in. So he goes in. So we all know the famous story. So he almost defeats the Kauravas and he kills Duryodhana's son. So Drona is under so much pressure that he uses deceit. So they attack him from behind. They break his bow. And finally Abhimanyu is killed in the most brutal way. And when this happens, Jayadratha uses his boon and he stops the Pandavas from entering the Chakravyuha. So Arjuna is so furious that he takes a vow that I will kill Jayadratha next day or I am going to die. So on the 14th day, there's a huge formation that is made by Drona, 3 formations, but Arjuna is able to kill Jayadratha. So here again, there is a myth, a story that, Krishna created an eclipse to help Arjuna kill Jayadratha. This is also not to be found in the original Mahabharata. This is a story that was added later. So Jayadratha is dead, and the war is so brutal that 7 out of the 11 Akshauhinis of the Kauravas are destroyed on one day by Arjuna. Such was Arjuna's fury because his son was killed by deceit. So effectively, the war gets over at this stage. So what remains is the formality. So Drona continues to war at night, and at night Gatotkacha, Bhima's son, becomes all powerful, and he wages havoc, and Karna has to kill him using Shakti weapon, which he had actually reserved for Arjuna. Then finally Drona becomes so desperate that he starts using Brahmastra against ordinary soldiers. Then Krishna decides to tell a lie that Ashwatthama is dead. So that is a story which we know. Finally Drona dies and the Drona Parva is over. And then Karna takes over as commander for 2 days. So this is interesting. For the first 10 days, Bhishma is commander. Then half of 10 is 5, Drona. Then half of 5 is 2, which is Karna. Half of 2 is 1. So 1 day Shalya is commander. Half of 1 is 1 night. So that is when Ashwatthama is commander. Anyway, when Karna takes over, Bhima kills Dushasana. And there is a final war between Arjuna and Karna. So Karna has been cursed in the past. So all those curses come into effect. There is a fierce fight and finally Arjuna beheads Karna. Then Shalya takes over on the last day, but he's killed by Yudhishthira. Shakuni is dead. Duryodhana goes and hides. He's challenged for a duel. And finally Bhima breaks his thigh. The war is over. So just when they think the war is over, Ashwatthama stages a deadly attack at night. So he attacks at night and he kills all those who were in the camp. Now Krishna knew this would happen, so he had taken the Pandavas away. So the Pandavas and Satyaki, who is Yadava, they survive. All the others, including the Pandavas' sons, are killed. So Pandavas go to find Ashwatthama. So there is a exchange of Brahmashira weapon. So the Brahmashira is like a nuclear weapon. It is so powerful. Now Ashwatthama doesn't have full control of the weapon. He cannot withdraw it. So what he does, he directs it to the womb of the Pandava women. So the wombs of all the Pandava women are destroyed, including Uttara, who is Abhimanyu's wife. So she loses her child, but Krishna later on brings the child back to earth. And then Krishna is so angry that he curses Ashwatthama. that for 5,000 years you suffer in pain and without food. So this curse has led to a famous story about Ashwatthama, which you would have seen in the film Kalki. And there is even a legend that Ashwatthama is still walking today, even though 5,000 years are already over. The next parva is the Stree Parva, wherein the women folk lament. They grieve the loss of their children and grandchildren. Gandhari is so furious that all her sons are dead. She curses Krishna. Now, Krishna says, it is your fault. You didn't control your son, but I accept your curse because it is destiny. This is what should have happened. Then Shanti Parva is the next Parva. Now, the Shanti Parva and Anushasan Parva, they are very significant Parvas because there is a lot of knowledge sharing that happens here. Now, Bhishma is lying on the bed of arrows. Yudhishthira comes to meet him and he advises him on various topics. So, that is what happens in the Shanti Parva. So, Yudhishthira is so disturbed to know that Karna was his brother. He says, I'm not going to rule, but finally they convince him. So, this continues through the Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva. So, like I said, there are so many topics, like, for example, the different Varnas, the different ashramas, dharma, raja dharma, apad dharma. There are so many topics. It is really vast. The Shanti and Anushasana Parva, there is a lot of learning here. Now, after giving all his advice, Bhishma leaves during Uttarayana, and Bhishma's last rites are performed. So then Yudhishthira takes over as emperor. So he performs the Ashwamedha Yajna, so that the sins of the war are redeemed. So Arjuna goes and fights. So during that, there is a famous fight with his son Babruwahana, wherein he falls. They think he is dead, but his wife Ulupi revives him. So there is a yajna which happens. A lot of charitable deeds take place, and Yudhishthira gets credit for that. Then, after 15 years after the war, Dhritarashtra is still staying there. So he says, I'm going to go to the forest for Vanaprastha to give up my life. So Kunti also accompanies him along with his wife Gandhari, Vidura, and Sanjaya. So the Pandavas go there to the forest to meet. So they are at Vyasa's ashram. There, Vidura gives up his soul. Vidura is nothing but a form of Yama or Dharma. Dharma was cursed, so he had to take birth on earth and he came as Vidura. So Vidura's soul merges with that of Yudhishthira. And Vyasa performs a miracle. He brings back all those who were dead for one night. So finally, the Pandavas go back after meeting their loved ones. And then later on, they find out that Dhritarashtra, Kunti, and Gandhari have died in a forest fire. So that ends one major chapter in the Mahabharata. Then the major ending takes place during the Mausala Parva. Now, Krishna's son Samba is notorious. So he tries to trick holy sages. So they get so angry that they curse him that you will deliver a Mausala or a mace, a club. So that Mausala is burnt and thrown away. But it goes and it forms into Eraka grass, and the grass itself becomes weapons, a Mausala. So the Yadavas are fighting among themselves constantly. Finally, they kill each other. And Balrama gives up his life, and we all know that Krishna is killed by a hunter. And Arjuna comes to perform the last rites of Krishna. He takes the survivors back, but bandits attack and take away Krishna's wives. So Arjuna cannot fight them. He's unable to fight them. So he's so dejected. He goes and meets Vyasa. So Vyasa says, how long you will fight? How long will you be a warrior? So he tells him a hint that your time is up. Whatever you had to do on earth is over. So Krishna was there all these years with you. Now Krishna is gone. So it is time for you to go. So then we move to the Mahaprasthanika Parva, the 17th Parva. So 36 years after the war, the Pandavas decide that we are going to go to the other world. So they make Abhimanyu's son Parikshit as the king and they leave. A dog accompanies them on their journey. As they climb Mount Meru, all of them one by one fall down and die due to shortage of oxygen. And finally, Yudhishthira survives. Indra comes and says, come, you are going to go to heaven. Yudhishthira says, yes, I'm come. What about my family? So he says, your family are already there. He says, this dog has been with me, so I want the dog to come. Indra says, no, I cannot allow a dog. Then Yudhishthira says, I'm not going to heaven without this dog. So the dog is none other than Dharma, who says that I tested you and you passed the test. And finally, we move to the last chapter, Svargarohana Parva. So Yudhishthira goes to heaven, but he's shocked to see Duryodhana. His family members are in hell. So Yudhishthira is again pained. He says, I will not go to heaven without my family. I will also stay in heaven. And then Dharma tells, this was another test. I tested you 3 times. You passed all the tests. So congratulations, you have entered heaven. So finally, the Mahabharata ends with all the key characters reaching heaven. The Pandavas reach heaven and they live there in the other world. So the Mahabharata ends with the words that those who listen to the story of Jaya will attain heaven. So there is a false story, a myth that says that you should not keep the Mahabharata in your home. It is inauspicious. If you keep the Mahabharata in your home, people will, families will fight. This is not correct because in the Mahabharata itself, there is a Falashruti at the end, which says that you must read the Mahabharata, you must listen to the story. If you do so, you will attain him. So with that, the 18 parvas of the Mahabharata gets over. So in brief, in the given time limitations, I have tried to give a summary. So all this is there in this particular book. So that's the end of my presentation. So thank you so much for listening to me and for your time. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, if anyone wants to go ahead and ask questions, please go ahead.
I have a questions regarding Eklavya. Satyendra
Yes, sir.
here from Hyderabad.
Yes, yes, sir.
I just want to know in Mahabharata this when this because there are certain stories that the actual cutting of thumb doesn't happen. Whether he actually his thumb was cut or himself cut it, and is there any discussion about after the incident whether that action of this Dronacharya was questioned in subsequent chapters, or was there any other interaction between this Eklavya and other characters? And was there any discussion about the right and wrong of that particular act?
So at the surface level, if we see Ekalavy's story, it seems to be a story of discrimination. That's how it looks like. But when we look into it, we find that the facts are otherwise. Because Ekalavya, one thing we must understand is that he was not a young kid like we all think. Ekalavya was actually old, and his father was working for Jarasandha. So Drona is supposed to be the guru of the Hastinapura Empire. So why would he teach someone who belongs to the enemy camp? And the common perception is that Ekalavya was a young boy, a tribal boy, but he was actually the son of the Nishada king. So it is not as straightforward. Point number one. Point number two, Drona was partial towards Arjuna. There's no doubt about that, which is why he had given him a oath that I will make you the greatest archer. And that's why he asked Ekalavya to cut off his thumb. But did the cutting of the thumb lead to Ekalavya becoming, handicapped? No, because Ekalavya continued to fight battles even after that. So he lost the thumb, yes, but he could shoot his arrows even without the thumb. So that is another interesting part. And in the end, guess who kills him? It is none other than Krishna, because he tries to attack Dwarka and then Krishna kills him. So the story that Ekalavya was a victim of caste repression, all that. So those are all not true. Yes, Drona was wrong to ask him to cut off his thumb. It was because of partiality towards Drona, towards his favorite Arjuna. But Ekalavya belonged to the enemy camp. So there was no reason for Drona to accept him as a student. And he was not a young boy, but rather he was a middle-aged man at that time. And he worked for the enemy camp, which is why all this happened.
Hi, in Harivansh, actually, Eklavya and his son had already attacked Mathura in Jarasandha's army before and after the thumb cutting also. So Eklavya had already gone and with his son attacked the Mathura before the
Yes.
war, before the
Yes.
incident with Drona. So in Harivansh, it is very
So,
clear.
so Ekalavya was not as, the perception is that he was an innocent little kid who had to suffer. But this is not the reality when we actually study the original text.
Further,
Yes.
cutting the finger of the Eklavya by Drona was necessary to establish the dharma. Whatever Guru Dronacharya did, which was by his dharmic tradition, because he wanted to save the dharma in the later life also. So if he would have not cut the finger of the Eklavya, he would have become more powerful, which was
No,
not which would have been adverse effect.
No, Agni Puran describes how you basically shoot the arrows. It's the fingers you use, not the thumb. Thumb is not meaningless to being an archer. It's the four fingers basically which control the arrow and placement and everything. So Drona's asking for thumb was basically asking for a Guru Dakshina. It is a sort of a moral down, I mean, moral loss of morale for Eklavya, but it did not would not have affected his skill set because the fingers are used, not the. That's how it is described in Agni Puran.
So I learned archery from a Japanese instructor, and he brought up the story of Ekalavya to me, and he mentioned to me that thumb doesn't actually get used when you shoot the arrow. So
Yep.
that
Same
was
here.
from archery. Yeah.
No, it was symbolic that Drona had given a promise to Arjuna, so he wanted to show Arjuna that yes, I have kept my promise, and it was a symbolic move to Ekalavya that you do not deserve to be my student because you are from the enemy camp. So why should you be my student? But that doesn't mean Ekalavya became handicapped. He continued to fight. So that is
And what was the
Ekalavya's story.
Varna of Eklavya?
He was a Nishada.
He
He
was
was a
adopted by a
Nishada tribe.
Nishad king. He was son of Krishna's uncle, Devashrava. He was Uddhav's older brother. Uddhav was Krishna's most favorite cousin. He was actually son of Vasudev's son, adopted by Hiranyadhanush. After all, everybody was captured, arrested by Kans. So you think about it, a big family. Vasudev is arrested by Kans. All the family starts running away in all directions. Shigal Vasudev, Pondrag Vasudev, and so on. So that's how the family got distributed. There was another fellow called Kaushik. He was actually found by some tribals in the forest. So there's actually another tribal brother of Krishna called Kaushik also in the story. But he doesn't appear in major Mahabharata as such. It's only in Bhagavad Puran and Vayu Puran.
So there's an interesting comment by author Abhinav. He says that even Nala was a Nishada, but no one calls Nala a downtrodden king.
Exactly.
So that's an unfortunate reality that there are all these false perceptions that have been created, and all this mostly happened after the 20th century because there was a attempt to try and project Karna as a victim of casteism to create a larger than life image of Karna. When that happened, various other stories also got came through. Any other questions?
So Deepak, did you have also written Blood Chronicles, basically, which is
Yes.
detailed description of the war for the first 10 days, right?
Yes. So my book Kurukshetra Chronicles, there are two parts. So in the first one, I've covered the first 5 days of the war, and in the second one, the next 5 days. The first one is called Blood and Iron. So it talks about how the war started, the first 5 days, what all happened. The second part is called as Fall of the Patriarch, wherein it talks about how Bhishma was brought down. So that is the covers the first 10 days of the war. So that is there in my book Kurukshetra Chronicles, and this book, like I said, it is a summary, an overview of the entire Mahabharata. If there are any other questions.
So what is the story about the dog that travels with Yudhishthira in the last end days of his life?
Yeah, so that is again, it is a test by Dharma. See, Yudhishthira was Dharma's son. Okay, so Yudhishthira is a very complex character. So we blame him that he played in the game of dice. He made a fool of himself. He waged his own brothers and wife. So there are criticisms against him, but yet his character shines. It stands out because he was stringent adherent to Dharma. So to highlight that, what happens? His father Dharma, Yama, he tests him. he tests him 3 times. First, he does it during the Yaksha Prashna, wherein Yudhishthira says that I will save my foster brother rather than my own brother. Then the second test, he comes as the dog. So he accompanies Yudhishthira throughout his journey. And Yudhishthira says, this dog has been with me, so it is now a part of my family. So I consider it a part of my family. I want it to come to heaven. So that's again a test by Dharma. So he insists that the dog should reach heaven. And the third test is when he says, I will stay in hell. I'm not going to go to heaven without my family. So these were various tests given. And sorry, these tests were just to bring out Yudhishthira's real character. So there is a question by Mr. Swaminathan, who asks if I've written a book exclusively on Krishna's advice to Arjuna prior to the battle. So there is no book as such, but it is part of my series on Kurukshetra Chronicles, wherein the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna is, in brief, it is highlighted. Because as we all know, the Bhagavad Gita is a very vast piece of text, and so many have commented about it. There are so many books written about Bhagavad Gita. So many people talk about Bhagavad Gita. So we know all that. So I didn't want to write exclusively about that because that's already well known. But I've just summed it up a bit in my series on Kurukshetra Chronicles. And even in this book, the original Vyasa Mahabharata, there is a very brief summary of the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, Anugita is also mentioned by Abhinav Agarwal. So this is interesting. Once the war was over, after the entire war was over, Arjuna comes and tells Krishna that, I'm sorry, I forgot everything you taught me. So just imagine, you go and tell your teacher that I forgot everything, what you taught me, teach me again. So Krishna doesn't lose his cool. He does scold him lightly. He says that even I cannot repeat everything what I said, but I'm going to tell it to you in a different form. So whatever he spoke about during the war, the Bhagavad Gita message, he puts it in a different form, and it is called as Anugita. So that is another interesting philosophical text which is a part of the Mahabharata.
One more question I have is
Yes, sir.
beyond the four Varna, is there any description of any caste in Mahabharata?
Beyond meaning, sir?
Beyond four Varna, is there any description of any caste, any subunit of the Varna or something like that?
See, like I said, the Nishadas, they were people. So they were a tribal community. So those kind of references are there. And interestingly, the caste system was actually a class system. It was not actually caste as such. It was class. It was based on the duty that they had assigned to be done. For example, the priestly class were Brahmins, the warriors were Kshatriyas. So there was no caste here as such, that you are born into this particular community and you will remain there for the rest of your lives. So there was interoperability between castes. So people could change their castes. So there are many such stories. In fact, as we all know, the most famous story about Karna, Sutaputra is supposed to be an insult, but this is not an insult actually. This is not an insult. So it was a way of addressing. Sutas, in fact, were very important people because they were key advisors to the king. See, Sanjaya was a Suta and he was advisor to Dhritarashtra. He would criticize Dhritarashtra like anything. If you read the war chapters, he directly says, it is because of your foolishness, because of your blind love for your son that this war is happening. So the Suta was not a low caste who actually would be, subjugated and who has to be a slave or something like that. So in fact, the Sutas ruled Anga. They were the kings of Anga, and that's how Arjuna became the king.
In Ashwamedha Parva, towards the end, when Yudhishthira is handing out the donations to all Varnas, he also mentions Malechya are part of my subjects and are welcomed. So he mentions Panchjana at that point. So that's where he's including all the outsiders as well as part of the system. And of course, in Bhisham later on tells about how mixed Varn
Yeah.
happens because of the marriages. But again, that has nothing to do with the actual position they have in the society. It is just that if they have a sons and everything. And in case of Suta, as Deepak pointed out, every seventh generation of Sut. So Sut is born of a Kshatriya and a Brahmani. And the seventh generation of the Sut automatically becomes a Dvija, or basically Brahman, in the original Brahmani's Gotra. So Suta were part of the actual Brahman structure. They were actually higher than Kshatriyas. So Sutput couldn't have been an insult if a Kshatriya utters it, because Sutputra is higher than a Kshatriya in that, if you want to make a higher or lower classification in that.
I think you got muted, Satyendra ji.
No, no,
Hello.
I'm getting interesting input, so I was just trying to have the information sink in. Is there any use of any title? Just like it happens in the modern era, every Hindu has got a title. Is there anybody in any character in Mahabharata had any title? Like
Title
Sharma
means
Tiwari and that title we are having right now.
no,
Sharma
no,
Tiwari,
no.
Burma, this kind of
Surname.
title.
Surname.
Surnames, yes. Yes, yes.
Father's name. So,
Yeah.
so
Is there
basically,
any
they
concept
would.
there?
Upmanyu is one of the disciples of Ayodh Dhaume. So Dhaume, this is not Dhaume, but in part of the Dhaume is Shishya Shankla. So he's called Ayodh Dhaume. His disciple is called Upmanyu. Upmanyu has a as a differentiation from other Upmanyus. He's called Upmanyu Kamboja. He has a disciple who has his own name and Upmanyav, his guru's name as a part of it. So that's how basically the naming was done. There was, and of course, all the Panchals will be called Panchals as such. Draupadi was called Panchali because she was from the kingdom of Panchal. Mathili, Sita was called Mathili because she was from Mithila. It's also called Vedhe, so it's called Vedehi. So that's why
Yes,
you
yes.
will have multiple names that way, but not
But I think primarily everywhere there people are known by single name only, and they have the other things emanating from their clan or something like Baidehi or what you call son of somebody, son of his father or something like that. But there is no title as such,
for the first
no
52
no
generations of the
surname as such.
Upanishad. Yeah, in the Upanishad, there are 52 generations described, and all the names are basically just matriarchal. 42 generations of matriarchal, 10 generations of patriarchal, and in all of those, the names are basically having the name of the person and the person next above, not basically like a whole structure. In some cases, if it's part of the Angiras group, of original guru was Angiras, so they would have a word for Angiras or something like that. For Ghor, Angiras was a teacher of Krishna. He was not literally a son of Angiras, but he was basically in that Shishya Shankhala.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we are well over time, so I think
Yeah.
and now this discussion can continue offline. I think anything about Ramayana Mahabharata is always very interesting, and we receive a lot of responses and questions. So thank you, Deepak ji, for this wonderful
Yeah.
talk,
Thank
and
you so much.
we hope to host you again maybe for your next books. And thanks
Sure.
everyone for attending today. Thank you, Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you.